Thanks so much. Thanks you guys for coming. I'm going to read a very short section from the book. So in Life and Death of Sophie Stark, there's a character who is a film critic, and he reviews each of the main character Sophie Stark's films. So this is his first review of her work that he wrote when he was in college. It's about Sophie Stark's movie Marianne. So it's called Despite Flaws, Marianne Makes an Impression by R. Benjamin Martin, class of 2005. This weekend's Independent Film Festival at Bolcher Auditorium featured a number of worthy and wholesome efforts. Bogdan, in particular, the story of one young boy's triumph over astigmatism, will no doubt be a contender this Oscar season. But it is not of Bogdan, nor of Woolly Bear, the majestic tale of an annual caterpillar migration, that I have come here to speak. I want to talk about Marianne. Marianne is not a perfect movie. It is not beautifully lit, nor, it must be said, even competently edited. The sound has roughly the clarity of an expiring person shouting for help from the bottom of a very deep well. The supporting actors are occasionally embarrassing. And yet Marianne is by far the most interesting film this critic had the pleasure of seeing at the festival, and perhaps the most interesting one his editors have ever assigned him to review, though Death/8 did, to be fair, have its moments. Many films try to convey the experience of being trapped in one's hometown. I'm still waiting for the movie that shows everyone what it feels like when your mom comes home every night with another part of her body ruined from her job, first her back, then her eyes, then the hands that spanked and comforted you as a child, and your dad, already ruined long before, lectures you from the couch every night on the importance of the education that he never got and that he has no idea how to pay for. And all your friends cut class to smoke pot and talk about dreams heart-wrenchingly out of step with anything the world will ever allow them. Marianne doesn't hit all these notes. Eager viewers will have to wait for this critic's screenplay to be picked up, an event surely in the offing. But the way the camera crowds Marianne and her family's tiny house captures the hemmed-in, desperate feeling underlying them better than any film I've ever seen. My editors at the august Daily Mongoose have recently requested that my writing be less personal. I do not think this is an objection to personal writing per se, as a colleague's account of her admittedly tragic and ultimately lost battle with acne was met with great praise. I think it is an objection to the substance of my personal anecdotes, and thus to my life. Given this, I will refrain from discussing at length how Marianne captures another aspect of small-town misery, the impossibility of escape. Being followed by a murderer from your past isn't quite the same as having the undeniable luck to win an academic scholarship, then arriving at college to find that everyone there has the same set of 4 experiences, none of which are yours, and that when you try to talk about any of your experiences, you are met with either suspicion or horror, or exhorted to lighten up. These topics are perhaps beyond the scope of Marianne, but later readers of my collected works, no doubt forthcoming within the next 10 or 20 years, depending on the velocity of my rise, may find them revealing as an illustration of my perspective. In any case, leaving aside those matters apparently out of place in a paper of the Mongoose's stature, I will say merely that Marianne accomplishes the difficult feat of conveying deep emotion by means not generally considered emotional. The framing of a shot, for instance, or the blocking of actors in a scene. The film's themes arise organically from the visual, rather than being forced upon the viewer through melodramatic dialogue or sentimental acting, as in many films that I could name but will not, since I already know I differ with many of my readers, and indeed my editors, in my opinion of them. In an effort to make my film reviews more conventional, I have been asked to award films stars. I have been told that the number of stars I assign will be printed in the paper, no questions asked. I award Marianne 3,468,994.2 stars. Note to copy desk. Please print this exact number of stars, or I will be forced to conclude that the Mongoose editorial staff not only has no regard for accuracy, but may not be able to count above 10. Editor's note, 3 stars.
So I thought maybe we could just start out, since you all kind of work in different mediums, to talk about how you got into your current field. Did you always want to do what you ended up doing, or did you come to it through something else?
I was a fiction writer originally. I actually know Anna because we went to the Iowa Writers Workshop together. I had never ever thought of doing anything screenwriting related. And then I think the either the only one in our whole class, certainly the only one in our group of friends that had a TV at Iowa. So I became known as like a TV fanatic, and just for having a TV, but I guess I am a fanatic. And one of my teachers there suggested, you know, you're so into TV, obviously, why don't you try, you know, writing for it? And it was something I'd never really considered. I still love writing fiction, but it set me on this path. And then when we graduated, I kind of just made this very spur of the moment decision. Like you know, there aren't so many ways to make money as a writer, and like I'm gonna move to LA and try my hand at this. And now I love it, but you know, I definitely in my heart still consider myself a fiction writer, so it's interesting.
I'm a cartoonist and an illustrator, and I also write personal essays, and I didn't really mean to get into any of it. I was raised by good middle-class parents who expected me to get a gainful employment of some kind. And so I just figured I'd be, you know, I would always draw and I would always write all my life, but, you know, just on the side for my own pleasure, and nobody would ever, you know, it was just like for fun, for pretend in a way. And then I just eventually kept getting back to it. I'd try not to, and then I'd get back to it, and people would push me in that direction. And just almost happened by accident. So, yeah, it's like sort of happened in spite of me, even though I guess it was meant to be.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I sort of have always done fiction writing. I mean, you know, I certainly started doing it at a really young age and pretty much have continued. I kind of backed into also doing nonfiction writing, as I think a lot of fiction writers do. When we were in school together, I applied for an internship at Jezebel, sort of like figuring I probably wouldn't get it. I think my application was like, I copied out some emails that my friends and I sent to one another and said, you should hire me. And so I started interning there and kind of continued. And so I still write nonfiction and journalism now, so that was more unexpected, I guess. Fiction is something I have been doing pretty much since even before I could actually write things down.
So are there ways the experience of working in your field is different than what you expected? Did what you thought was going to happen differ from the reality of it?
I mean, my answer is pretty obvious. Like, I wasn't even expecting to be doing it, so it was a big surprise to be doing it, and I didn't really have any expectations. Although, like, I would say as a child, growing up, I just thought, like, I thought all the books that were in the library were all the books that were ever going to be in the library. So, like, when I wrote stuff, it was like I was pretending to be a writer, you know what I mean? And the same with the cartoons. Like, I don't know where I thought they came from, but I like the North Pole, maybe. You know, like, I didn't. So, yeah, I mean, it's a huge surprise to be doing it myself, and I'm one of the few people surrounded by, like, all the younger cartoonists at the New Yorker have all actually got degrees in cartooning. I never even heard of such a thing. So I'm sort of self-made, and like I said, I had no expectations, and I just sort of invent everything as I go along. So it's almost, it's sort of what I expected because it's whatever I'm making it. So.
Yeah, I had a similar experience, especially because I didn't think I was necessarily ever going to be a screenwriter, where I grew up loving books and understanding that books were written. I did understand that new books would be added to the library. I wanted to be a writer. But with TV shows, I had the exact same thing you're talking about, where I just wasn't thinking about the fact that people were actually writing them. I get obsessed with like the people starring on the show, or like went through phases where I was definitely obsessed with certain TV shows, but I never ever thought like, oh, someone wrote that particular line or noticed who had written an episode. And now doing it, I love like being like, oh, I can like write this line and see these characters, you know, say this thing. But I also still have the like super fan TV viewer in me, where like people at work will be like, no one will notice if it's like winter now and it was like you know, like summer and I'm like, no, like people, fans of TV shows, like trust me, as someone who grew up like just blindly watching them, like they recognize like when you like have, you know, logical problems like that. So I'm very annoying at work, but I definitely combine those two things.
I guess for me, I think I thought that being a writer was a lot more like binary than it actually is. Like I definitely, growing up, never expected to be able to publish a book, like to have someone actually accept something and make it into a book. I thought that was like probably not going to happen. But I thought that once that did happen to someone, that then immediately you are like a famous writer, and then you basically are like Homer or something, like you end up in the Western canon at that point. And you know, then I grew up and realized that it doesn't work like that, and that, you know, and also just sort of that like writing can be a job for people in a way that I don't think I at all realized. I think I thought it was this, you know, very mysterious thing, you know, that would sort of happen, and then your books would happen, and I didn't realize, like, no, you go and you sit down and it takes a long time and you do it, you know, and then maybe you have other things that you do also, and it's all sort of part of your life, and that was not clear to me until kind of recently.
So I know both writing and I'm sure illustrating are sort of more solitary pursuits, but I'm curious how the like sort of writer's room collaborative aspect, what that was like for you.
Yeah, that was a huge change for me. I loved in fiction writing the aloneness of it. And in Iowa especially, we had class once a week, and the rest of the time you were just writing on your own. The idea of even writing a tiny thing with someone else was so weird to me. And it's crazy because for some reason with screenwriting, unlike almost any other art form, I mean certainly any other writing art form, it's almost always collaborative on a TV show. So it's strange, like, you know, I had to get used to the fact that, you know, I might think something's worded perfectly, and, you know, like the other people in the writer's room think it's terrible. And also especially on a show like Girls, where there's Lena Dunham's like at the helm, and like it's very much her voice and everything has to be consistent with that. You know, whatever I consider like my vision is secondary to that. So like that was something I had to get used to. But in contrast, like when I'm in the hiatus, I often try to write like a movie, you know, or take on a movie project, and then you can go back to your like writer. I have like very much like, as Anna would always say, like drinking tea in sweatpants is like very much my life when I'm not working on Girls.
So I wonder if you could each talk a little bit about your experience as a woman in the field you're in. Do you feel there are different expectations for women as opposed to men? And are they expected to deal with different subject matter or behave differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes. I mean, it's hard because I feel like with anything like that, you never know if someone's reacting to you in a certain way because of your gender or for some other reason. Like, it's not, you know, sometimes you know, but often you don't. But I do think with fiction, I think, you know, in addition to, you know, sort of some of the things that people talk about a lot in terms of like how women's books are packaged and how women's books are reviewed and how women's books are sold, I do think that there's kind of, like, I mean, something that I wanted to touch on a little bit in my book, even though, you know, she's not a fiction writer, she's a film director, I did want to think about, you know, like, do you have the freedom to like be a jerk when you are a female writer or like a female artist of any kind? And it's like, often no. And I mean, should anyone have that freedom? I don't know. But I think it's something that like, certainly male artists throughout the ages have at least had the freedom to be like, go away, I'm working. You know, which like I don't think is really a freedom yet that we much give to women, although now I see women's residencies popping up and certain things popping up to kind of give women that space, but it's still not quite as accepted, I think.
Oh yeah, my husband's always like, you know, he's a painter and a cartoonist as well, and God forbid you bother him while he's working, but like, you know, he doesn't quite get it when I'm like, get away! You know, like, why are you so grumpy? You know, why, you know, God, I'm just asking you something, you know, like, which like, it's really, he gets a lot more leeway in that way than I do. And so just the first part of your question, I think the reactions of people or the perceptions.
I guess what you've experienced.
What I experienced,
personally.
like in cartooning.
Yeah.
For example, because the New Yorker has like a minority of women cartoonists, so when I first appeared on the scene, I took a lot of flack from guys like sort of implying or saying outright that I was like a token female, that kind of stuff, or like what did I do to get in there, you know, which I don't think, you know, anybody would have asked my husband, like, who did you sleep with to get in here, you know, you're the token guy from Oswego, I don't know, you know what I mean? So yeah, I took a little bit of that in the beginning, which I just decided to take as, you know, hazing as a new person, right? I guess, who knows what they do to guys, right? So So, yeah, you definitely, there's different ways of being hazed and different ways of, not being understood as an artist, I guess, as a woman.
Yeah, I always go back and forth on whether, because in certain ways it can be an advantage, even though in like 99% of the ways of the world, being a woman, I do not find to be an advantage. But in screenwriting, like I have noticed recently, and it's sad that it took this long, but like, as soon as movies like Bridesmaids, Sex and the City movies started coming out and making money, there's now this push, and all these TV shows, New Girl, Girls, like the Mindy Project. Once these things came out and were successful, now it's like, oh, you're a female, we want a female comedy writer for this. Like there's a lot of, like, it's like a little bit trendy right now. So that is, I can't say that's not an advantage, even though at the same time, like, exactly as you're saying, you can then easily be dismissed just day to day by other writers as like, oh, they needed a girl writer for that. Or like I was like brought in to help like punch up, joke-wise, like some script. And I was the only woman brought in, and there were like 11 male comedy writers, and I'm lucky enough that on the show I work, all of my bosses are female. Like I've worked on Girls for, 5 years now. I've only had female bosses. But so this was one of my first times being in a room of like just male comedy writers. And we talked about the script, and then when the writer of the script left the room to go like meet with producers, all of the comedy writers like turned their back on me, like physically, and I'm sure they didn't know they were doing it. I know some of these guys, some of them are like friends with my boyfriend, literally physically turned their backs and only talked to each other. And I was like, oh, this is what most female screenwriters feel like in a writer's room. Just like your thoughts are not as important to them.
Although I can say one thing that was an advantage to me was once they had 60 Minutes come into the New Yorker to film the process of submitting to the your cartoons, and everybody showed up like really early, but I didn't, because I just knew like there were going to be like 50 guys and only maybe 5 women, and I'm like, I know that I stand a higher chance of being chosen as one of the subjects. And sure enough, I showed up, and within a half hour I was mic'd. And I was just like, well, haha, that's for like, how did I get this job, okay? So yeah, there is some advantages to being a minority.
Sure. Do you ever like pitch cartoons that they don't want to accept for reasons?
I've actually had someone say, oh, that's too female humor, and I actually had my editor once said something like, yeah, you do relationship cartoons, and I was like, no, I don't. Like, you buy relationship cartoons, but like it's not 100. Like I submit all sorts of cartoons to you, but you tend to buy the relationship cartoons from me, probably because I'm a woman.
Right.
Which is one of the reasons I've always signed my name just by my initials, to try to avoid being typecast, but you still have your editor who has certain expectations of you. And I think it's getting less and less, because now the pressure with magazines to use their space more equitably and not have as many cartoons in it, they concentrate now on visuals instead of just like captions. So if you do a cartoon that's visually interesting, you will have, whether you're a man or a woman, you have more of a chance of getting the cartoon. Right? So there's ways of, it's interesting how it changes according to the economy. I don't know.
Well, there's one thing to thank that for.
Yeah.
So with your book coming out, did you feel any sort of like pushed in any corners because it's has a woman protagonist or takes one as the lead character at all?
I mean, the thing that I noticed that I think has to do with gender is that a lot of people, and this happened with the first book too, but it made a lot more sense, a lot of people would assume that the book was YA. And I mean, I guess the title could be YAE, but if it was, the life and death of, Mark Jones, I don't think that someone would say the same thing. And that wasn't coming from, my editors or people in the publishing house, but just like people that would hear the title or see the cover. And I read YA, and I think YA is wonderful, so it's not necessarily bad, but it's also like, oh, like you think that this should be for young people. That's interesting.
Yeah. So how, if at all, do you think issues of gender come up in your own work? Probably a lot, I would guess.
Yeah, I mean, Lena is very fond of saying like Girls is a feminist act. Like we're definitely, aggressively talking about feminism and like, almost used to the point where like someone will be, we like don't even want to explicitly address certain things just because we feel like having a show with a female protagonist who doesn't look like the typical, you know, TV star, and who hopefully we're portraying like a more honest, you know, depiction of sex. I mean, according to the young people we are, I don't know, and all the scared parents who like come up to me asking if it's all true. But so all of that, yes, and I mean, just it's something we're always talking about and thinking about, and lucky enough because like it is a lot of women writing it, and Lena is the star and the creator. Like it also isn't something we have to always talk about just because like it's there. Like I feel like we're doing something that's important for women, you know, regardless of the content of certain episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I think gender comes up a lot in my work. You know, both in my first novel and in this novel, I think, I guess one thing I think about a lot is like the concept of a hero, and I've always wanted to write stories about heroes, or I mean, in this book maybe she's a little bit more of an anti-hero, but I've always wanted, I think, to like say that like, you know, that a woman can be a hero, that we can have a female hero, and I guess, yes, you know, it's a heroine, but also just that all the sort of like trappings of importance that we put on who is a hero, that those trappings can be put on a woman too. I think that's something that I always kind of try to get across in a lot of things I write.
Me, in my cartoons, I find that there are certain lines that are typical of a woman that are really funny in the mouth of a man. So like one of my last cartoons was it hasn't been published yet, so it's a guy on the subway, and he's like, you know, ladies and gentlemen, can anybody spare a little lip balm? You know, like just a little Vaseline, anything, you know, which originally had been a woman. But then I thought, you know, it's funnier if it's a guy. So yeah, little things like that, like things are funnier if a guy says it, just because it's unexpected, you know, but not necessarily in a sexist way, you know. And then like in my writing, because I write personal essays, I find myself making, I don't know, like a conscious effort to not do it in a way that's only relatable by women. Like, because I know women will get it, but I'd like guys to read it too, and get it too, in a way, like, so it's like a human experience, but it's also a woman's experience that they can relate to, somehow. So, like, I sort of go both ways. I feel the pull.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a question of when you are writing or, you know, have a female protagonist is a way to make it accessible to everybody. I'm sure that's something you guys come across as well.
I mean, it's funny, like, it's a funny expectation. I mean, I don't know that, for instance, that novels or TV or cartoons or anything with a male protagonist, or even, for instance, I notice this in movies a lot, movies with only men in them, essentially. Usually people don't ask, like, how do we make this more accessible to everyone? Although they're starting to. Like now, like, I mean, as we've been talking about, like, there's more and more where now people kind of recognize, like, oh, like, women enjoy to also have women sometimes depicted.
I'm so considerate.
Yeah.
Considerate.
Yeah.
But we don't understand Goodfellas, apparently.
No, we don't.
So maybe sort of opening up the discussion a little bit more. Have you had any mentors or role models in your creative life, and how have they helped you to get where you are?
I have like an embarrassing abundance of mentors, but mostly women. And I don't know, I guess I've been lucky enough that like I've had a few, especially out in LA, I've had like a few very supportive women who were further along in their careers than me who helped me. And my two bosses, Lena and then Jenny Connor is the executive producer of our show, they're just like so committed to supporting like any young person who's working, you know, maybe as like a PA or something. If they want to be a writer, they're very willing to read it, like especially if it's a woman. Like I've seen them take that special interest. And it's inspiring to me, and I love, you know, and then I love, you know, as I've slowly like risen the ranks at Girls, like I love having the opportunity to do that. Like there's a writer's assistant who has a script, like now I get to be the one who like reads it, you know, and like tries to help them, and like I'm so happy that that's the environment that I'm in, and not one that fosters like competition or any feeling like there isn't enough for all of us.
Go ahead.
Because I sort of didn't follow the path that most people do, like going to school for things, one of the most important things a person ever told me was when I was working for a stylist, like not one of my vocations, like it was a job. But I was like trying to find clothes for a shoot, and people were like, brushing me off, and the deadline was coming, and basically my boss comes in and sees me like bursting into tears, and I'm like, I can't put clothes, nobody's answering my phone, and she just sort of said, Carolita, imagine like who should be crying? It should be me, because if they're brushing you up, it's because of me. Like they don't think I'm important enough. You're my assistant. But do you see me crying? She's like, no, because the most important thing you have to learn in your work is to save your emotions for the creative side of the job. This is all just logistics. Save your emotions for the creative side. And that was probably one of the most important things anybody ever told me.
Love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I feel like I've had a lot of really helpful mentors. I mean, Sam Chang at Iowa and Anna Holmes at Jezebel both helped me a lot. Also, I think that several people who have told me to quit things have been really helpful. When I was in college, I had a poetry teacher, Rick Barrett, who's a wonderful poet. You guys should all buy his books. He, at the end of the semester, he's like, yeah, you're like an okay poet. You should just stop this and be a fiction writer. And I didn't feel insulted at all, and I was like, thank you. That is very helpful advice for narrowing down my life. And I still write poetry sometimes, but it was really nice and like clarifying. And then I also, I wrote a novel before I wrote American Pacifica, and I was shopping it around to agents, and people were nice and getting back to me, but not taking it. And then finally, one agent was like, hey, like, this is pretty interesting. Like, I don't think this is like a novel that will actually come out, but I think you're a good writer, so I think you should stop working on this and work on something else. And again, I was like, oh, okay. That's really nice. I will stop working on this and work on something else.
Yeah. So who are three of your favorite artists working now in the field? Male or female?
Well, I'm definitely only naming females, but I like a lot of male artists as well. I mean, Joan Didion like remains like I admire her writing like consistently throughout my life always. In terms of like slightly more contemporary and I guess more in my field, I think Amy Schumer's doing like really important comedy work right now that everyone should be paying attention to, especially if you consider yourself a feminist, which I hope you all do. And the third one, I have to think about for a second. There's too many. It's because there's too many and I don't want them to all be too similar to each other.
Yeah, me, I was, I don't really pay too much attention to what's going on around me, so expecting to have to name anyone from the present. Like I would, but I was just telling a friend of mine that I just noticed that I'm just going to use one of my own people, which was Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I was just saying she invented Uber, basically. She did this book called What Diantha Did, where she basically invented like this sort of the service of home delivery of, it's not Uber, but like, what is that, like that table thing? Blue Apron.
Like
She
yeah,
invented
Seamless.
basically Seamless and Blue Apron.
So funny.
It's true, have you read it? So like, I have to go back to the past for her. I can't let go of her. But yeah, like Lena Dunham is amazing, totally amazing, and Amy Schumer. Yeah, I have to agree with you.
And the Broad City Girls
Yeah.
are also pay attention to
I
them.
don't get cable, so I don't know. I get it on Netflix later, so I'm sort of a year behind all of you.
Yeah, I think Julie Maretu, who is a painter, she makes these sort of like, they look, I mean, many of you probably seen them, they look like maps of like a post-apocalyptic stadium or something, and they're giant, huge. I saw her paintings right before I started American Pacifica, and I was like obsessed with them, and I thought about them all the time when I was writing that, and I still think about them all the time. You will remember his name and I will not, but the director of the Paranormal Activity films, which I think are like a true expression of American genius.
Or
Yeah, or something. Anyway, I mean, the important thing is go watch all the Paranormal Activity movies back to back. I think they're really smart. I think they like have a really interesting thing to say about like the horrors of California living. And then also Miriam Toews, whose novel All My Kidney Sorrows came out recently, but then she has a bunch of novels, most of which are about Mennonites, or Mennonite people. And she's also an actress, and she's in a film about Mennonites living in Mexico, and then one of her novels is about a film about Mennonites living in Mexico.
Which one came first?
I don't know. It creeps me out. She's a great actress.
It's like you discovered she's psychic.
Yeah, and I didn't know anything about this book before I picked it up, and was like, oh my god, and the movie's amazing. So read all her novels and see this movie, which is called The Something Light. It's great.
Okay. So what advice would you give a woman entering your field today?
I guess support all the other women around you. I mean, it sounds corny, but it was what was done to me, and it's like invaluable to me. I can't even imagine I wouldn't have a career without that. And even when we were back at Iowa, I remember we had a very tight-knit little group of friends, and I remember other people in the program being like, it's so competitive and cutthroat here. And we were all just naturally, I don't know why, but we were all so supportive of each other, and so willing to like read each other's work and really genuinely wanting to be a part of each other's work, you know. It made a huge difference for me. So I guess starting out, that's like what I think of as like my formative writing years, where it was like sharing with my female friends and like helping each other grow in that way.
Yeah, I think that's amazing because, you know, I'm envious of people who have all that support because I just sort of popped up like alone and, you know, watched other people having their little brotherhoods and fellowships.
There's
And
a lot of brotherhoods out
yeah,
there.
I mean, I actually went on the New Yorker softball team just to be able to see other people and other cartoonists, and it was kind of disappointing because I had to play softball. And I didn't really get that fellowship that I was craving. And, you know, the closest I ever came to it was when I started working with Edith Zimmerman, who was my editor at the Hairpin. And it was just the most wonderful thing to work with someone, you know, like have someone like be honest with you and like have her come up with all the things you were a little insecure about in the piece you just wrote, and she actually pushed her finger right on it. You're like, I was just thinking that. And it's sort of like being in love, and you know, and that was so great. And like, yeah, if you can work with someone else, always do it. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo all that, definitely supporting other people. I think the flip side of that too is like, don't be afraid to ask
Yes.
for help.
Yes,
Don't be afraid to
I was
ask for
gonna say that,
favors. A lot of people, like, it's a nice feeling to be able to help someone out if you can, so people will be willing to help you if you ask.
No, I think that's crucial actually, and I've noticed that it has to be some connection to like women being taught to be less pushy growing up, which I hope is changing, but I noticed, especially when I moved to LA, and like I would see it most, the difference in my actor friends. I don't have many actor friends, and I'm probably not friends with any of them anymore, but like the guys I noticed would like see a director they wanted to work with at a party and like shove themselves in that person's face, introduce them all officious, like try, you know, like basically just like really pushing themselves. And a lot of my women friends were just much more timid, you know, like you weren't sure, and I'm pretty outgoing as it is, as you guys can probably tell, but I made a conscious effort of like, I'm not gonna worry about seeming pushy, like I'm gonna follow through if I meet someone and I wanna meet up with them or have coffee with them, or, you know, people will say no to you if they don't want to do the favor, and most of the time, like they, you know, people are happy to help someone who's starting out in their career. So definitely, like, don't be afraid to ask for help, to like ask for guidance, like all of that.
Oh yeah, I have one more thing. That my husband always would tell me when we compare our batches of cartoons every week, I'd be like, well, I don't know, I'm gonna put this one in. Maybe it's already been done, or you know, maybe it's just not right for the magazine. And he would tell me it's their job to find out if it's already been done, and it's their job to reject you. So I always tell my friends when they're afraid to do something, I'm like, let other people reject you. Don't reject yourself. Just do it.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think too, like, I mean, people say this a lot, but I think it's really true. Well, I think two things. I think you can never thank people enough, so like overthank, but also like under apologize. I feel like it's become like a meme now that women apologize too much, but I think it's really true. And I've had to train myself like over the past couple of years to like not say sorry if I didn't actually do anything bad, because then I'm sending someone the message that I did something bad.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't say sorry unless you feel bad, or unless you have to for something.
Yeah.
Because you really did something.
Yeah, I mean, if you did that, you should apologize, definitely. But often you don't. So I want to open it up to questions from the audience, but first, if you could talk a little bit about what you're working on now or what's next for you.
We're shooting season 5 of Girls. We'll be done in August, and then I'm pitching on 2 different movie projects that I'm hoping to get at least one of them for the hiatus. And then in my dream world, I'm writing fiction again, so I'll say that, but I don't know if that's going to happen like in the next year or so.
Oh, obviously, I'm working on a book, a sort of memoir and essays. I've been writing, actually I've finished half of it, but I'm working on a proposal, and the proposal seems to be the hardest part. But I'm gonna get it done this summer, I swear. It's gonna happen. And so that's one thing. But also the thing that happens every time I start writing my proposal is I start writing like fiction, which is funny. It's like I have this procrastination urge in me, so I started writing this book about a woman who escapes to a women's colony, like women spelled with a Y-N at the end, and then like has to come back to New York and go undercover as a New York woman.
That sounds so good. Forget your proposal, I'll just try that.
Kill her best friend. And then as well, I'm working on a series of cartoons that I started, my own webcomic, and then the New Yorker is always ongoing.
Yeah, I think another thing that I didn't realize about Mayfield when I was a teenager is how much work goes into having her book come out. And so I'm still working on some of that stuff. And most of it is fun, but it definitely takes time. And once that's all done, I think I'm gonna take some time to like sleep and like make cookies and things. But I'm working on another novel very, very slowly. It might be a little bit more like the first novel, and there will also be a lot about gender, and maybe that's all I have to say for now.
Okay. So questions from you guys?
I don't know if I can word this, something up positively. Just talk about, like, there's a very supportive culture, I think, among women right now, just to support each other's work. The sense of competition we naturally have as human beings, like, how do you process that, and, like, do you feel like you have to suppress it? And, like, just how does it come out?
I think that almost maybe cooperation and competition can coexist. I kind of feel like if I feel like someone did something really amazing, then it is possible to like, sure, you're going to be jealous for a second, but then you're going to be like, okay, well that makes me more motivated to go and do the next amazing thing that I want to do. I mean, also that's like kind of Pollyanna-ish. I think you can also like, you know, you can have all the ugly feelings that people have when they are competitive people and when they're in like a competitive field, and then still like kind of put those in like the ugly feeling box in your head and be like, okay, but also like it's time for me to reach out, you know. And it's, I think also like in most cases these aren't zero-sum games. In most cases, like this is also mercenary, but if you have a friend who's really successful or a colleague who's really successful, probably that will help you. So.
Yeah, that's how I selfishly think about it too. That's exactly what I do. I mean, I definitely don't want it to sound like I'm not like occasionally sending like gossipy mean emails to people, like being like, ugh, you know, like I didn't even like that book, or, you know, like that, of course. But I have, for some reason, early on, just taken. I always remind myself like, I do feel there's enough, you know, pieces of the pie for everyone. Especially as you see that like something written by a woman is successful, and then that means they want more books, you know, or movies or TV shows written by women. Like that's only good for women. So like I always try to remind myself of that. And exactly as Anna said, like I love it when my friends are successful because, you know, the nice part of me is happy for them, but even if there's a part of me that's jealous, that you can, it's just like, this will only like be good for all of us. Like we can be like a team of artistic superheroes together, and like that's how I have to think about it.
I also, as a cartoonist, one of the things you run up against a lot is, like especially amongst the men, I've noticed, they'll be like, oh, you know, I did that cartoon. Like, you know, and it didn't sell, and, you know, and like sometimes they accuse each other of stealing each other's cartoons, or, and I remember I was once listening to like the Brian Mira show, and somebody's like, I submitted this cartoon to the New Yorker like 30 years ago, and then it appeared like the next week, or something like, you know, and I actually had to call in, because the same thing has happened to me, but I knew, like, a lot of people have the same ideas, you know, and you know, even if someone somehow got into my head, you know, and wrote the thing down somehow, they got into my head and found out my idea and stole it from me. Like, God forbid that should be my last cartoon idea. So I just feel like, you know, you're supposed to have a lot more in you than that one little thing that you think someone stole from you. So, or did before you. So if somebody did it before you, well, fine. If they did it well, then, you know, let go of it. If they didn't do it well, then do it better. But
You can always do it your
yeah,
way.
you can always do it your way. You can never do something exactly the way someone else is going to do it. That's what style is.
Yeah.
Any questions? Yeah.
If you guys wouldn't mind describing maybe your creative processes, where you get it for inspiration, your habits, if you drink coffee.
I had to stop drinking coffee in graduate school because I would drink like a big iced coffee, and then I'd be like, I'm a genius. And then it actually, like, the writing would be pretty good, but then I would like have a panic attack from my like genius attack. So like if you've seen Beavis and Butthead, it was like the cornholio. So I had to quit, but now I get my inspiration from, I don't know, sitting around and staring.
Sweatpants and tea.
I get my inspiration mostly from, I don't know, just going through the world, conflicts that I have in my mind with things that I hear. And I think, yeah, that's wrong, or that something ought to be like this, or, you know, or my little fantasies, like when I first moved in with my husband, like I'd been a loner till I was like 43. You know, I've never lived with anybody, and suddenly like, here's this guy, you know, and like I didn't want to go home sometimes, so it's like, oh, there's always something at home, you know? And I had these fantasies like about running off to the women's colony, you know. I was actually Googling like women only, you know, like, and so that like, from that rose this idea for this like novel that I want to do someday of the women's colony. And so yeah, everything comes from conflict and perplexity for me.
Yeah, me too. It's like fights with my
Yeah.
boyfriend. It sounds so mundane. And you know, like being mad at my parents, like still. Like, there's like stuff like that. And then, you know, I definitely drink a ton of coffee. I like hang out with my dog. I walk around. But also if I'm ever feeling, you know, I truly believe that like one of my coworkers who actually is also a cartoonist, he's always like, you're writing when you're not writing. Like, he's like, it's okay. Like, you know, like, go watch your stupid TV show. Like, go watch Real Housewives. I'll be honest with you guys. Go watch Real Housewives. You know, he's like, do whatever you need to do. Like, go to sleep, hang out with your dog, go out, drink. He's like, that's writing. Like, it's the same way that your brain is still working when you're asleep. So, like, if you can kind of embrace that, for me at least, like, it made me calm down about everything a little bit more.
Like the day job for me, like,
Yeah.
I'm one of those people, like, even if I could just stay home and write and draw all day long, I would probably still get some kind of day job, because like when you're at the day job, that's when your mind starts wandering.
Yeah.
And like, but when you're sitting there going, I must be creative, I must think of something that's a lot harder. So I don't know, I'd love to be at the point where I could just sit down and draw.
Yeah.
Like and just do nothing else. And I feel like that would be the next level, the next sort of Zen level of my professional life. But for the moment, I do strive on, I do thrive on that conflict between the time I want to give and the time I don't want to give to it.
I have time for probably one more.
I mean, I guess this is kind of a similar question, but how, like, at what point did you guys start to find topics? And is that something that exists more in the professional area of writing, or more in the kind of writing on my own school of thought, where you're sort of starting out with an independent project? Makes any sense.
I think something that I feel like people talk about in journalism all the time, but I think it applies in fiction too, is like that you can't just have like an idea, you have to have a story. So for, you know, if I'm like pitching a journalistic story, I can't be like, sneakers. I have to be like, this guy who, you know, formed a sneaker empire, but secretly he was just selling like black market snakes or something. You know, So I think like for a long time for me, I was only coming up like with topics. Like I would think like psychic that has a daughter, or living in upstate Washington, you know? And then like I'd be like And for me, like a lot of the process of actually being able to write a whole novel was like figuring out how to go from like a topic to a real story.
Yeah, that's been hard for me actually. I have the same thing. The psychic actually like triggered something in me because I was like, I totally have like notebooks with like one sentence about a psychic, but it's like, what is the story there? Yeah, I'll have like flashes of ideas. Also, growing up, most of my ideas were always just like very autobiographical, like something happened to me and I wanted to fictionalize it slightly. And
It turned out better.
yeah, I still do that. So yeah, it's actually kind of hard to find the balance because sometimes there will be a topic that I really want to write about, but if you can't find the right angle or character or like way into it, you know, you have to let go of them and kind of just like hope you can use it later, I think.
Yeah, topics are easier in cartooning than in writing. Like in cartooning, you can just be like, oh, desert island. How can I do it differently? You know, so for something that's only going to have one frame, yeah, you can do topics, but for writing, you really do need the whole story to sort of almost gel for you all at once. Like it's sort of just come like in a little bubble all together to you. You're like, I must write that down before I forget it, and then then you can work through it.
So you gotta find your bubble.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much, and thank you for coming out. As I said, we have wine and books for sale in the back, so I hope you'll stick around.
Thank you.